Everyone, and welcome to today's masterclass. First of all, let me briefly introduce our speaker today. Amit is a UX and industrial design consultant, educator, and social entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience. Amit is also the founder of the internationally award-winning Plus One initiative, and they are doing sustainability driven venture that upcycles non-recyclable materials into valuable products and interventions. And today's masterclass explores how culture, context, and lived experiences shape user behavior and decision making. So let's welcome our speaker. And Amit, feel free to go ahead and take the lead.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And really happy to see so many of you after a very long time. So that's really great. Thank you for all the kind words. A little bit about my intro. Just to add on, so I've also now I'm ICF coach, International Coaching Federation certified coach and a counselor. So I'm helping people, and that's where I think this subject really connected the most because there are different angles to empathy that we see. Of course, some of you would be in design, would be designing stuff, but now when we look at it from different angles, it really adds different ways of approaching empathy. And I think this is something which I just want to bring on table today and just help us to explore those elements. So considering that some of you would be new to design, just taking a very big, um, you know, 10,000 feet view to start with, that the normal perception is design is just purely creative, which is not true because design, as most of us would know, has a lot of different layers. It is goal driven. It has to have a very specific business angle to it. You cannot just design stuff for the fun. Of course, there could be some designs which are there, but most of the designs need to have a certain goal, a business perspective going forward. It is vision driven, what we want to achieve through it. It becomes also one of the key parameters when you decide to design something, come up with a solution. And when I use this word design, I'm using it on a very, very, large scale. It is something where it can be a service, it can be a product, it could be an intervention, it could be a policy, it could be anything that we are coming up with. And for that, we need to also have, along with the goal in terms of what are the analytical aspects we are looking at, we also need to look at what is the vision, what it should do, what it should achieve is something that we look into. And the third element, which is people driven, is where we'll focus on today, is about who are we designing it for, and really getting to understand those users, those customers, consumers, beneficiaries, whatever you want to call them as, to be able to really benefit from it. At the end, we always talk about human centered design, but we will see this in the context in the next few slides, that we need to also think beyond it. We need to go a little bit beyond the human-centered element when we talk about empathy, and we will take a little bit of dip into it as well. And it has to be result oriented. We can not just keep on creating solutions which may not have a benefit or a clear measurable accountable outcome. And that's why when we talk about design, it is amalgamation of all of these things, but it starts with the very word that this master class is all about. It is about empathy. And just to take a very high level understanding, we all must have seen this, but just bringing this aspect today to look at the design process, or if I can put it, it's more of the design thinking process, right? It's about understanding and empathy, where we will dig deeper into today. But we also go at why we do this, what we are trying to accomplish through it, is then coming up with the right problem to solve. That is the biggest thing that we tend to look at from empathy. Sometimes we have an idea of what problems the user is facing, and that is our perception. And that's why different aspects of empathy help us to dig deeper in different contexts to really understand different elements. So, that definition becomes the second step. Then we have the problem statement, which is drafted. Once we have the question, human intelligence can is a like the brain, our nature, our evolution is about problem solving. So, I think in the design process, this first couple of steps in terms of the empathy, the definition, and the definition and the problem statement we come up with is the most critical part. I always tell this, and whenever I have a discussion with people, once a good problem is defined, the job is 80% done. Coming up with different ideas is our second nature. We have always learned, we have always been taught to solve problems. Like rarely in any of the schools, and I can talk about India, but I'm sure it could be across the globe, that none of us are taught, or there is not a subject which gives us solutions and we have to draft problems for it. We have never been trained into that kind of an understanding, and that's why the initial phase of really building that understanding for the what we want to solve is something we look into. After the problem statement and the ideation, we look at prototyping and testing, and this is the classic process that we follow. And again, this has been the backbone of what we have been doing for a very long time. Of course, Impact Week also is based on the similar framework where we dig deeper, understanding the design thinking process, and then helping startups and early companies, or companies in the early stage, to really blossom from there. So going back to our topic today, what we are going to discuss is about empathy. And the first thing that we need to understand is what is empathy. And most of us would have heard this classic definition, is that the designer needs to put himself or herself in the user's shoes. As much as this is relatable, I somewhere would take the liberty to disagree with it. Um, at the very onset, when we look at different types of empathy, we have to understand that we always perceive what the other person is going through. And it may be on the emotional level, it may be on the cognitive level, it may be on the semiotic level, which we will dig deeper into. But I cannot feel what the other person is feeling. I cannot understand the pain of a mother giving birth. I cannot understand the pain of someone who is not eaten for 5 days, right? It is very, very different. So, as much as we relate to this, and this is the classic definition that every school, every college, every university, we not put yourself in the user's shoes, right? And feel what they feel. Yes, we can, but that feeling is our perception, and we will talk about that a little bit. So, just to talk about what empathy is, according to me, it is the way in which we perceive someone else's pain, problem, suffering, if it can be, or any kind of issue that they go through. And that is the perception is something that becomes the base of empathy. So in today's world, we are solving global problems. During the COVID times, we had the Impact Week. During COVID, we were sitting at home and we were solving problems across the globe digitally, right? So that is also something that is coming up. And how do I relate to someone in the other part of the world sitting in my house and looking at the screen? So there are a lot of different layers to it which need to be unfolded when we talk about empathy. So whether it's about different cultures, its religion, socioeconomic background, or even political opinions, they do make a huge difference in terms of how we perceive the other person, or the beneficiary, or the user. And we are constantly interacting with people who see the world very differently than us, right? So all of us, or most of us, are coming from different parts of the world, and we have our perceptions which are very, very different. And that's why, as a designer, as a person who wants to empathize, as much as this skill is necessary, there are certain aspects we need to be aware about, right? So whenever we talk about this in psychology, or when we talk about understanding the human brain, right? The major difference between all the animals and the humans is the prefrontal cortex, the intellectual brain that we have, right? And that is what has made us rule the world. We have the largest prefrontal cortex to the size of head for any species in the world, right? Though the elephant has a bigger prefrontal cortex, the head is still bigger. So our cognition levels are much higher than any wild animal that is there. Saying this, it is driven by evolution, right? Has anyone read the book called Sapiens? Have you heard of this book called Sapiens? Or can anyone guess how long have we been on Earth? Human species. Any wild guesses? So, as per the book Sapiens, it says that humans, now I will not go in the Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and other, as per the humans, I just got a couple of messages, so let's see. Um Okay, 200,000 years, 10,000 years. Yes, 10,000 years is the Homo sapiens, right? The Homo erectus go back. So there were Neanderthals and other, you know, pre ancestors. So 70,000 years is what it has been tracked that humans are on Earth, okay, or human ancestors are on Earth. And if you take it on the scale of if you want to really understand humans, and when we talk about empathy and we talk about all of this, I just want to give this perspective, right? If we take the life of the earth as 1 year, okay, starting from 1st of Jan and ending on like today is 31st December midnight. The humans have arrived on this planet at 11:59 a.m. PM. So we are here in the lifespan of the earth. Human species are in existence for that last 1 minute. That's how long the earth has been in existence. So when we talk about empathy and when we talk about, we are the ones who can understand animals and we can understand the nature. There are a lot of these perceptions that we feel we know, but the earth has been there and has solved all the problems. So there's a lot to learn about all of these things from the surroundings. And that's why I said it needs to go beyond human-centered design. Empathy has to be very, very, multidimensional. And we will talk a little bit about it in today's discussion. So when we talk about empathy, it has been a buzzword in the recent past, right? The IDEO founders designed the design thinking methodology or the five-step process. They coined the term design thinking. Till that time, it was considered to be a designer's tool, but they brought a framework to it, and that's why what we understood through it is empathy is a skill and not a personality trait. We can learn to empathize, and that's what we will see at different levels of what are the levels at which we can empathize. Of course, this is just going to be the scratching of the surface. There's a lot of depth in each of the elements that I'm going to show you today. But it should give you an idea that empathy runs at different levels. But there are different ways through which we empathize, right? And these are some of the elements that we see here. We observe, we look around, we see what is going on, we pay attention to things, and we perceive what could be a problem, what could be the issue with the person or the situation, or we understand how it's happening. We tune in, we actively listen to others, and we try to understand what they have to say about their experiences, their thoughts, their perceptions about it. We relate to it, we find parallels in our own life experiences that will help us identify how someone's perspectives have been built. So that is one of the ways we try to empathize with people. We connect, right? And again, there's this word walking into their shoes. But as I said, right, how many of us have been part of teams? We have been part of design thinking challenges where we are designing for someone in let's say natural disaster. We cannot go. We can have an understanding how that would have felt, but suffocating under, maybe there's an earthquake and we are trying to design something to help people who have been into natural calamity. And I was recently working with one of the teams on that, and this a very same discussion came in. We cannot be in their shoes. We cannot be 24 hours stuck under, you know hundreds of kgs of cement, and then expect them what and how they will react, how can they do things around it. It's going to be very, very different. And that's why as a designer, as someone who wants to come up with a solution for someone else, we need to understand that empathy is a skill. It is not something we can, just come up with and understand. And the last one way of empathizing, or the element of helping understand people, is reaching out, right? Respond appropriate to person thoughts, acts of compassion. So that is one way of really looking at empathy as well, which we will see as we dig deeper into it. So these are some of the activities that we perform to feel that we are empathizing with the person, or we try to get different understandings from it. But there is much more deeper discussions that go as we look into it. So let's dive into empathy a little bit more beyond the surface. Yeah. So the first part I want to bring up is the very word of deep empathy. When we talk about deep empathy, it is not just observe, interact, and immerse, right? That is not just at that level. We try to enter into the mind space, and for that, we have to apply different tools, techniques. We have to really ask questions in a specific way so that we can unveil, the user's mind space. Or if some of you would have heard the word called mental models. Do you know what a mental model is? Have you heard this word called mental models? Okay. So, mental models is basically, in a very simple language, our perception towards the world. Every person, every one of us has a mental model, okay, of everything. Our mental model of a good morning, mental model of a session, a mental model of a good meeting, a mental model of a good meal. Everything around us, we have mental models. And these mental models have different layers which form these mental models. Okay. I will take a little bit of time about talking about mental models, because in simple words, they are expectations. So for example, you may have a mental model of how a online session would run, right? And if you close your eyes, and even before the session, you would have expected, okay, there's going to be a speaker, there'll be an introduction, that person will talk about a topic, there would be some time of feedback or questions, and that's how the session will end, right? But if something changes, right, and there are no slides to start with, we are just talking, and you'll be like, what's going on here? It was supposed to be a session where we are going to learn something new, and this person is just talking. It just changes the mental model, and that changes your reactions, right? And that changes the way you will interact with things in a positive or a negative way. And that's what happens when, as designers, we are trying to empathize with users. Just the way we interact, or the way we understand how the person is, or what we try to perceive, it goes at different levels, because none of us can explain what our mental models are, and they have to be revealed. So, as a designer, as a researcher, as a person who is trying to understand the other person or other group of people, you need to uncover the elements of mental model. What is, because mental models can go at different level. Like, what is your mental model about trust? If you try to give it a thought, what is your mental, what would make you trust something, right? Like, now if I say, okay, I want to come up with a solution to help marginal communities to start saving, okay, and they want to put whatever small extra money they have into an account. Let's say it's going to be a digital account, and I want to get them to put that aside, as something for them to save. Now, this is very simple to say it. Okay, I want to come up with it, but what is going to make them do this? Right? They need to trust this platform. If I'm, let's say, if it's an online tool where they can, start saving, and they can see how much they have saved, and they get some interest on it, right? Will I know that I can build it, right? So there are two levels in terms of design. We talk about usability, and we talk about persuasion or perception or trust. I can build something very good, but will that connect with the user becomes a very important problem. And that's where deep empathy goes. Because I want to first know that, okay, I'm coming up with a solution. Will people trust it? So I need to understand what are their mental models of trust. My mental model of trust may not be the same as your mental model of trust. And that's why, as a designer, as a researcher, I need to uncover those different aspects of what does trust means to you, what is your mental model about it, and that is what deep empathy talks about. It is about going into that mental space of really uncovering those aspects, and we will see how we tend to look into it on a deeper level. So to begin with, let's understand different types of empathies, okay, and what different empathy look like. So one is the cognitive empathy, right? This is where you are able to understand someone's mental state or understand their point of view without getting emotionally attached to it, right? And that is something which is very, very important. So the ability to understand how other person thinks, perceives the situation, makes decisions, and interprets the world without necessarily feeling what they feel. Okay. In this case, you are evaluating, right? You are trying to understand. You are not necessarily really getting affected by it. And that is where cognitive empathy comes into play, where cognitive empathy is primarily about understanding the user or understanding the person, their point of view, their expectations, their goals, their pains, their frustrations, all of that, and their needs, their wants, but without getting swept away with emotions, right? And that is something which a lot of us need to learn, because it's very difficult as humans to be very cognitively detached. But sometimes to have rational decisions, we need to learn about how we can detach ourselves and be more cognitively there, be present, be actively listening to the user, but not into the not getting swept away by emotions. The second part is the emotional empathy that comes into play, right? And this is where, when you're talking to someone who is more closer to us, a friend, a family member, we get emotionally attached to the person's feelings, right? And that is something where we tend to, again, when we get attached to the feelings, it's our perception of a feeling. If someone has lost a lot of money and they are feeling dejected and they have no way of tracking money, in that case, how do I feel about it is my perception about it, right? So when we look at different empathy models and then we connect with the culture, all of it starts making sense, right? Because the way I would look at things is going to be very different than what someone on the other part of the world is going to look at. So first is the cognitive empathy, second is emotional empathy, so where you tend to connect emotionally with the user. Third one is a compassionate empathy. Now, this is a little bit deeper than emotional empathy, where in emotional empathy, you feel the emotions, but in compassionate empathy, you are trying to immediately react to it by identifying what could be the way to solve it, right? So, compassionate empathy or sympathetic empathy, what we call it as, is where we tend to, or the designer gets the urge to immediately solve it there and then. And that is something which happens a lot with designers or researchers, where they see something, they feel, and they sympathize with the user and they want to come up with a solution very quickly. And this is important to understand, because a good designer will always hold up on going into a compassionate empathy, because that reactive solutions could may not be very uh, you know well drafted going forward, or they may not be very well thought about, because you are into that emotional state where you are trying to solve a problem. Similarly, if you tend to get emotionally carried away and then trying to solve a problem, you may not listen to the user or may not learn from the user, which sometimes you get into the solution mode and you miss some very important information. So it is important to learn that as a researcher, as a person who is trying to understand other people, you have to be cognitively present. That is the best part, but it's the hardest. Emotional empathy is what most of us would do. And also, there is a lot of compassionate empathy that happens where we tend to try to solve those problems there and then. And that is where we want to know this so that we can try to stay away from immediately solving the problem. So these are three levels of empathy. There are other sub levels which we'll see quickly, and then we'll go back to the cultural element. There is one more element which is called as the affective empathy, which is a subtype of emotional empathy, where this involves having the ability to understand and share in other person's emotions without being emotionally stimulated. So similar to that, in terms of emotional empathy, we have two levels in it, and we will talk about it. When we talk about emotional, one is affective, where it is closer to cognitive empathy, where we tend to understand, we feel the emotions, but don't get carried away by it. So some of the examples that we see is a therapist who may feel what is going on, they understand what's going on, but they don't get carried away. They want to have, help the person who is getting therapy, but they have to be present, they have to feel it. Only then they will be able to suggest the way forward for the user. So that is subtype of an emotional empathy, which is called as the affective empathy. And there is another element which is called as somatic empathy, where different parts of our brain are involved, where we tend to have the similar physical reactions to the responses that the person is giving. For example, if a person has gone through a very strong emotion like rage, and you hear it, you also feel angry, you start sweating as a person who is, understanding that information. Or someone starts getting very, very emotional, gets teary eyes, you get carried away, your body starts reacting in a similar way, right? So if someone feels embarrassed in a certain situation, right? So there is this example of and it's a classic example that we see in Africa. They build these toilets, they're called as dignity toilets, where people had to defecate outside. It was very embarrassing, and through that they came up with this solution where this is a toilet which can be carried. It's like a subscription model. These are closed toilets, like a box, and there's a chemical in it, so which ensures that there is no smell, foul smell, there is no any kind of infections, and people can use it at the end of the week. The company would take away the toilets, the old toilets, and put a new one in the house, and that was primarily to reduce the embarrassment. And when the interviews were taken, when researchers went through it, they went through this somatic empathy where they felt the embarrassment for people who had to defecate outside. So that is a different level of empathy as well. So as I said, the reason I wanted to just bring this up is to give you that, or tell you that there are different levels. These are all very deep. I can talk about each of it for more than an hour, but at different levels, we need to start thinking, okay, where I am getting involved as a designer or as a person, what does this situations calls for, right? Sometimes we get very much carried away by things that are happening around us, and we have to tell ourselves that to come back to it, right? It is very, very important to be able to be understanding at what level this empathy should be, or we should feel the empathy for the user. It cannot be same at every level, because otherwise you will not be able to rationally think about the solution. At times you get emotionally carried away, and a lot of emotional solutions may not work in long term. So these elements of five different types of empathy, three main and two subtypes, is something I just want to bring on table today to tell you that even empathy has multiple dimensions to it. So to quickly go through this, right now, if we try to understand it through the cultural element, now looking at all of that into the different cultural diversity aspects to it, right? Now each culture brings in a very different approach to the way we empathize, right? Um, Again, don't take me on it, but when I was I was studying in the UK, what I saw or heard was like, especially in India. A lot of people are very expressive towards grief, towards happiness, towards um, certain emotions that they show. Especially grief is something people will express. But um, I remember this very vividly because my guide lost his very close friend, and he came back and he said, "Okay, I just came back from my friend's funeral," and I asked him, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Yes, we are taught to be okay in these situations. We have been raised to be okay," and it was a shock for me, because if I was in his place, I would have not been able to work for 2 days, because the way we tend to express grief or relate to it is very different than what that doesn't mean it at no levels it's lesser or more. It's just the way what we see and how people express that, and that becomes a very strong element in cultural diversity. So one of the first elements that we see in a cultural diversity is the personal history, in terms of how experiences drive someone's reactions, right? past success or failures, how have they come out of it? Their education and background becomes one of it. Their skills in terms of learning different aspects becomes one of it, and their beliefs about self, nothing but mental models, become the first part of your cultural understanding of the user. That can be related to the relationships. So how relationships are in terms of expressed or maintained. There are countries where they're very socially connected. There are countries which celebrate independence a lot, right? So family and caregivers, friends, partners, mentors, loved ones, how relationships are maintained, how relationships are worked in, right? So that becomes one of the key aspects to learn as well. You cannot just go for a specific issue. Let's say I want to you know, um, design a new education system in Cuba. I just can't go as a foreigner and just, start uh, designing it altogether. There are a lot of levels at which I need to understand the people who have designed it. I need to understand people who are, or the children who are learning from it. What are the relationships that they have? What kind of values do they really, carry with themselves in terms of what are the core values in terms of their personal achievements, in terms of their family pride, in terms of their value in terms of being known in the society becomes very, very important. And you have the social norms. How does the community look at you? How does the government look at you in terms of certain aspects, right? How does the how your friends and family look at you? At these become very, very important to also uncover when we are trying to understand people. And of course, culture plays a big role in terms of traditions, in terms of festivals, the way they are, how they express, how do they celebrate certain things. How does the language influence them, the way in which they express themselves, right? Religion, spirituality, all of this can be bound. And these five pillars help us to really understand different aspects, underlining aspects like personal history and relationship will tell you, how do the people relate with others. Now, if I'm coming up with a product or a service or a solution, how will it, if it's a cross personal design, how do people relate to each other and how does will that succeed? What do I need to make it successful becomes very important. Relationships or other relationship and values will help me to understand what are the challenges that may come up with in terms of values that may not relate to a certain culture or may not relate to certain type of people, and that becomes one of the aspects. Values and social norms will help me understand the norms that shape that what we value, what we don't value, how do we perceive certain things is what we can learn from it. And social norm and culture help me to get a lens of the how does the culture define what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, right? What is expected from you as a person, and there are different aspects to it which become very, very important. So when I'm talking about cognitive, emotional, compassionate empathy, that is the first level of it. And then I add one more layer to it, which is about all of these lenses. And once I start understanding these aspects as a designer, I start mapping it, right? And I start looking at what are the needs versus wants, right? We know all of us must have heard. Have you heard about the Maslow's hierarchy? You know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's where a lot of users tend to put their wants as their needs. And that is again one of the key aspects. Through empathy, we try to understand, is it a want or is it a need? And that is something which we tend to look into. And that's why, as a designer, as a researcher, as someone who is doing or understanding other people, we need to have a lot of different levels of contextual awareness. And that's what we call as the sixth sense for a designer. And there are different lenses to it, especially in the cultural context that we are going to look at, right? What is the social context of the product or a service or a solution that we are going to come up with? Right? What are the cultural norms? Can something be accepted in the culture? Does it, right from a very basic thing of a color of a product can be accepted or rejected based on perception of colors in a certain culture. A symbol or icon on an app can define whether it's going to be accepted or rejected in a culture because it can be something which can, uh, have some kind of negative connotation which was not considered. So, what kind of social context comes into community expectations become the part of the social context that we look into. Once we look at the social context, the other lens that we look at is the economic context. What is cheap for me may not be cheap for someone else. What is the perception of a dollar? How do I perceive $1? Let's say a global denomination of dollar. How do I value a dollar in my country or my family or my upbringing can be very different than someone else. So affordability, access, and market conditions have to be analyzed as we empathize, because the reactions that you get from people are all based on these things. So social context, economic context, technological context, right? In terms of what are the users exposed to, what kind of technologies they have been exposed to, what are the trends that they know, what are the aspects that they are aware about. Now, these learnings have to be incorporated in your discussions that you would be doing as a through the interview or other things that are there. So these become very important to dig deeper into. Then we have the environmental context, which is becoming one of the things, as one of the key players in terms of how product services are going to be designed and perceived. And that is beyond just human-centered design. It's about sustainability, ecological impact, right? So what you see is the image is a 3D printed home that you see. So now we are reducing the carbon footprint by reducing the amount of extracted ore. So these are primarily built with cement that is coming from furnaces which produce electricity. Whatever coal, whatever is burnt is then brought in with a natural epoxy. It is mixed and it is used as a raw material to build. So what are the environmental aspects of different cultures, different countries become very, very important to keep in mind. And at the end, when you look at all of this, the last part that becomes very important is about the organizational context. At the end, whenever we talk about innovation, it always has three lenses. One is desirability, what we are trying to uncover through empathy. Is there the need of something in the market? Second is feasibility. Can technologically we build it? Right? That is what we saw. Technologically or environmentally, can we build it? And the last lens is viability. Does it have a business viable, proposition? If it is not, that idea, even if it is great, can last for a bit and it cannot be scaled at a higher level. So what is the organization? If it's for a company or for a startup, what are we looking at? What do we look at it as a, something that is going to last? How are we going to build it as a business? And it doesn't need to be always profitable or for-profit business. It can be an NGO. It can be something for the society, but it should have an organizational context. And that becomes very, very important. So these different lenses or contextual awareness elements become the key aspects for the designer or the person who is reflecting or understanding the users. So just to wind up what we spoke about so far, right? It is all about understanding the user, of course, as we know, at different levels. So cognitive, emotional, compassionate. We looked at different aspects in terms of how the religion, the culture, the values, the family systems become very, very important. At the same time, the different levels of socio-economic, organizational context and awareness about it becomes very important. So the whenever I want to design something, I need to do a lot of background research first, even before I talk to the first person. I need to understand through these lenses what are the aspects. So when I read the person in front of me, I will have that understanding. Otherwise, I will always look at that person from my lens, and that is not something which is going to be helpful. So understand lived experiences. Once we have those background, now it's all about going in the field and talking to people, understanding, observing people, going and experiencing what they experience, identify the emotional drivers behind it. And it could be something, again, coming from upbringing, coming from family, coming from the society, coming from the government. All of this becomes very important. Communicate insights to stakeholders once you learn it. So after learning all of this, you tend to put everything together. And it is not just data, it is about stories which are coming from a person with a specific background. And that is where understanding these aspects become very, very important. Once we are done with it, it is important to start looking at the frame of reference. Now, we understood different high level types of empathy. We understood how the other aspects in terms of culture relate to it. Now, we apply different aspects of socio-economic, organizational, sustainable elements to it. We understood that after that, we tend to take stories and understand stories. And now we start looking at the solution space or probable solution space, what we call as concepts, and how does the user sees this. If a solution was designed, how, what will be the features is the later part. But how does the user sees this? How does the business would look at it? Is it going to be something which they had predicted or they had thought about, or with the empathy and with the understanding of the users, do we need to change that angle? How does the society sees this? How do they really perceive those elements around it? And how might the future generation would see it? And it would be a very simple example of, growing your own vegetables. Like we have worked with a company which is into hydroponics, right? So how does the user see it? They feel that they are self-sufficient. How does the business see it? They see it as, rooftop solutions for healthy food. How does the society sees it? They see that person as a conscious citizen. And how the future generation sees it is, something where they know that they are self-sustained and they can grow their own food, and they're not dependent on others. So there could be different lenses through which each of these learnings can be interpreted. Okay, I know yeah, we have around 9 minutes. So I'm just going to quickly talk about few aspects of. Now we must be saying, okay, this is all great, but how do we map it? So I'm going to show you four maps very quickly, very simple. They are all kind of related to each other, and then we will understand how we can really now articulate the information that is coming through us. So I'm going to zoom through the journey maps because that's something most of you would have known, but I'll still talk about it. I want to focus on the ecosystem map a little bit and the needs framework of a couple of minutes. So when we talk about a customer journey map, when we understand the user, so first we do our research, we understand the different cultural context, we go and talk to the person or we observe the person, we collect data, then we break down the user's understanding of a certain product or a service or a certain issue that is there into phases. And each of these phases can be part of our learning to understand what is happening with that phase, right? So this is an example of someone taking a loan, right? So what is their way of even someone going to apply for the loan? There are multiple phases. They decide about it, they learn about it, they choose the type of loan, they apply, they purchase, and they complete the process. And during that, there are certain elements of what they feel and they think that we always need to look at, and that can be mapped through the empathy map, but it can be also learned through empathy, like the cognitive empathy or the compassion empathy, to understand what's going on. And then what are the technological aspects that are involved in it is something that we tend to map using the user journey. But this is the first phase. This is the normal tool that a lot of thinking processes would use. But now, if we are going for getting a mortgage loan for your house or your dream, right, there are a lot of more elements that go into it. And that's why once we create the customer journey map, we dig deeper into the next type of map, which is the, sorry, which is the lifestyle mapping. And in that life cycle, we still have different phases in terms of the user discovering what they want, they evaluating different options. Sorry, did you lose me for a second? No? Okay. So how do they acquire the loan? How do they activate that process? And for each of it, there is a customer objective. There's a mental model of that customer that they intend. So if I'm applying for a loan, what do I expect? Understanding home financing option is what the person expects in the discovery phase. What are the product offering need to be there? It should be in, education, calculators, information. So it should be telling what the product is all about. So that is what the product should do. So when I'm designing a solution, my solution should offer this as a part of helping the users to map their mental models. Customer activities, what do they need to do to gain this learning? They need to research, they need to explore, right? And then in terms of what would they feel as a success in their design process would be awareness and engagement, that they would feel that yes, they are understanding this. And that leads us into finding out opportunities for innovation. So at every life stage can be broken into what is the user's mental model, which the empathy gives us. Based on it, their product capabilities of what they want to see, their wants and needs, is what we can map. What they need to do is something that we understand based on their way of interacting in the society and other aspects. And then we can define how we can measure whether whatever we are offering is successful or not through the success matrix, and where could be the opportunities to innovate is something that we can map in the product life cycle mapping that we do. So this is at the product level. But the third type of map that we look at goes a little bit deeper. And here we understand that any product, service, any solution that we come up with cannot be looked in isolation. There are a lot of layers into it. Any product being accepted, rejected, any product growing in terms of adoption or shrinking in terms of the way in which it is accepted or not will be based on a lot of different aspects, because humans are social creatures. So for anything as simple as a mortgage loan that a user is taking, there are government regulations, there are digital channels, relationship channels, there are property ecosystems, there are family influences. So all of this matters before the user takes that decision. So I'm talking to the user, I'm understanding his or her perspective. But then I need to go out and see what is happening, right? So where are they learning things from? What are the supporting aspects that are there in the ecosystem that can help? What kind of technology the user is aware about or is there in the entire system that can help the user? How do they make payments in general, right? So that they know our different ways of payment. And also what happens if once the loan is taken in this example, right? How does the system work? So it is a system level thinking. We also call it a system design, right? So ecosystem design or system design, which looks beyond the user. And once we know the user, we expand our frame of reference to go and dig deeper into it. And the last part that we talk about is about the needs framework. So once we have mapped the user in terms of the journey, we have understood the different levels of engagement in terms of the product life cycle, and then we have mapped the ecosystem. The last one is consolidation of all of this into the needs framework, where we look at what are the users, emotional needs, social needs, trust needs, right? So trust, all of these are coming from their mental models, and their mental models are based on their culture, background, and how they have been looking at things. What are the information required for each of the interaction that the user is doing? So this is just an example I've taken for mortgage loan. So if so, Caroline, are we sharing the presentation with everyone? Okay, so you will be able to see it in more detail. I just wanted to just give you that these are the levels that we look into in terms of needs framework. And once we are able to do that, we try to see that what level of Maslow's hierarchy our solution is sitting in. Are we dealing at the basic functional level, or are we dealing at the emotional level, is something that we try to understand. And then we map based on it that what should our product offer. And based on it, we also look at what are the needs that we have identified and what could be the potential innovations that we can bring in. So this is where we start mapping all of this and putting it together to start making sense of this information. And then we are also able to see what are the feelings that we can bring in. How do you make the user feel better or more happy or more relieved? And how can we identify pointers where they feel stresses, and how can we reduce it? Now, this again is primarily dependent on how well your research has gone through, how well your empathy has gone through. So that will help us to understand what are the stressors, what works, what doesn't work, and how can we correct it for the user. So this primarily brings us to the end of our presentation, couple of slides, and that's where we look at empathy beyond just human-centered design. So we look at communities, we look at ecosystems like what we saw, non-human actors, technology, right? In terms of services, infrastructure is something we look into. Environmental systems is something that we tend to look into to interpret cultural lenses and then bring those in. And last but not the least, we need to look at climate change, sustainability, and ecological collapse. That is something which has really made a big impact now in each and every solution that we are coming up with. We cannot just look at it from, okay, it's going to work for humans or not. We have to see how it fits into the ecological chain. How does it reduce the impact, the footprint, or rather, how does it bring a positive carbon emission, reduce the carbon emission, bring a positive element to it, is something that we tend to look into. So that's what brings me down to the last slide, where uh, it is all about breaking our prejudice, breaking our perception about how people are, and then looking at it from their lens, being honest about it, being learned about what the different cultures feel, perceive, what excites them, what they don't like. All of this has to be learned, and then when you go for your research, you are in a much better position to learn about the users in their context rather than applying your mental models on theirs. Yeah. So this brings us to the end of my quick talk, exactly 1 hour, not 1 hour, but it's on time. And if you have any questions, I don't know if you have time for any questions, but I would take if there are any.
Spot landing. Thank you.
So there's a lot of things. It's just been compressed in a few slides. So I hope once you go through the presentation, you will be able to get more sense of it.
I, I do have a question.
Sure.
The probably most obvious one. So, how do we achieve deep empathy? So now we have the theory in our head, and we all been taught to, conduct interviews with our target group and maybe do some monitoring or shadowing. So I was thinking throughout the presentation, what other means do we have at hand to, tune in deeper into their heads, into their emotions, apart from interviewing them and
Right.
observing them?
Very interesting. I'm just going to add one layer to this in terms of AI. I didn't get a chance to speak about it. But what we do now, after, like, let's say you've spoken to 5 users or 5 people, you've understood a few things about them. So maybe I'll stop sharing so I can see everyone. I've stopped sharing, right? Okay. So you tend to use that or capture that information, put in an AI model. There are a lot of different AI tools, and we can do something called as synthetic users. So it gives me more number of users that are similar in terms of that nature. And based on it, then we do something called as sentiment analysis. Okay, you can write down if you, I don't know if you have used it, but that sentiment analysis is very, very interesting, which tells you or it helps you to read the emotions in terms of different ways in which the expressions have happened. There are also tools, a very interesting tool. There is one from Notion AI, but there is one more very specific tool. If I have done a recording of an interview, I can upload it, and just in the variation of the tone, it picks up where the user was confused, where the user was cautious, where the user was excited. And just in the modulation of the voice, it can translate and tell you the different emotions that were generated during that talk. So in today's world, that is something that we are using extensively to analyze. Of course, it was more human centric before, like you have to be really tuned in as a observer or a researcher, but now we can align that with tools to cross check it. So that is something which will help you to understand emotions more. But other than that, we can also really look into understanding, or the best way I learned is talking to people from different cultures and understanding their perspectives on different topics. And this is something which becomes very important to see from the same top or for the same topic, different lenses that people have, and that becomes very, very helpful. So that is how you tune in. It's an art, I think. You hone that art, and that's the way you get better at it. Yeah,
Thank you. So you're saying in the end, it's about conversing. It's about talking to them and training your empathy.
absolutely.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yes.
Marta wrote something in the chat. She was asking
Yes.
what the name of the tool is. Maybe do you
Yes.
have a link or something
I
we
was
should
just
share?
finding the link for her.
Perfect.
That's yeah. I'll also share a blog about sentiment analysis, which is also interesting in the chat for everyone. So this is the blog, and
I
I'll share
also,
the tool.
oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I'd also have a question to, I guess it was one of the very first slides you shared, the first empathy slide where you do not get attached, just like where you listen. But sometimes it's really hard to not get in the feeling with them and solving mode. How are there some tricks along the way where you can just like, okay, be empathetic, but still like detach from the situation and still like, okay, hold back and keep a calm mind and
Right. Yes. So in this case, there are a couple of techniques that are used, right? In terms of, so one way, what we call as preloading. Preloading is basically, this is a tool that we train our researchers with, is we run that interview internally in the team. Okay, like whatever questions are, and if there are certain questions which may be leading to certain kind of emotions, we tend to just talk about them in a little bit more detail to see what the users feel initially, or what the research team now. So research team does a role play of what sentiments can be generated. Of course, they are not going to be 100%, but we predict beforehand. So if what research shows is, as a person, if I know you are going to be, you know, just for, you're going to be angry, I'm more prepared as a person to handle that better, instead of it coming at me, as a surprise, right? So that's why it's the psychology thing that a lot of people say, right? Before reacting, think about it. Take 10 seconds, let your brain process, and then react. So that's what we tend to. The preloading is all about that, where we tend to ask the team to role play and go through the emotions that may come in this, and based on it, then we are in a better position to not. It is hard, it is something which again has to be trained on, but then you are in a position to anticipate this may happen. This person is going to get angry, this person is going to get disturbed, this person, so I'm a little bit more prepared, and that helps me to look at that, their reactions or how they react to it, and then note them down, rather than getting carried away by not anticipating what it was supposed to be, or what kind of emotions was going to be triggered. So that is one of the techniques that we use a lot. Also, in some cases, what we do is, if it is going to be something which is emotionally charged, I don't know how much time but I can give you an example. So we were designing an insurance claim form. Okay, what we identified from the company was that insurance claim form was left halfway by a lot of people. Now, it is a very important artifact, right? It's a life insurance form. Someone has passed away and the family wants to claim the money, but a lot of people are dropping off while filling it, right? And they were coming and they were talking to a person to get these resolved and not doing it online. And we were not able to understand what's going on. So what we actually went and then we started observing, then we started, understanding why this was happening. And what we learned was that in the form, the person who has passed away, that person's name was asked almost 10 times. So every time the other person who is claiming the insurance was typing that name, it was creating an emotional spike. And after a certain time, for some people, it's getting overwhelming. Okay, and they couldn't do it, and that's something that we learned from it. So initially, when we spoke about this with people, we were getting emotional. So the other way we tried is, you do a recording of that interview and then see through the voice modulation. You can learn that the voice got heavy here, so you are able to anticipate the emotions of that person in that context, right? So one way to learn about, before getting too emotionally carried away, you can do a recording where you're not seeing the person live, but then you can at least have an understanding what the person is going through, and then use that recording, understand and anticipate, and then go to for the live interviews. So these are some things that we use.
thank you.
Okay. Any other things?
Just thinking if it's pertinent to lead interviews in a way which provokes strong emotions, like if we should structure our questions, to make the opponent more emotional, to be like for ourselves to be able to tune in more, if that is a way to adjust our interview technique?
We do it, but we do it after. So we do something called as warming up. So when I know I'm going to ask a question which may trigger a strong emotion, I will warm up the participant throughout. So it is not something I'll ask in the first two or three questions. I will have some icebreakers, getting into the person, talking a little bit about myself to make them feel, tell my vulnerabilities a little bit, give a direction. Okay, we have heard a certain thing, or we talked to someone and they gave a very in-person experience. Would you like to share an experience? So
Mm.
after warming up, it becomes helpful. But to answer your question, yes, if your design asks or requires you to know the emotional journey of the user, you should have some trigger. But you should also need to have your escape routes. If the person gets overwhelmed, what kind of questions you should have in your kitty to get that emotion
Mm.
down, or to get the person diverted from that heavy emotion to again continue with the interview. Because a lot of times, if you really trigger it high, the person may just abandon the interview altogether. They would say, this
Mm.
is too much for me, I don't want to do it. So how do you maneuver that becomes the key.
Mm. Yeah,
How
makes
Yeah.
sense.
how do we not, as an interviewer, do not get too involved into those situations? Because sometimes you can like really tune in, really connect emotionally,
Yeah.
and this is also sometimes, I guess, yeah, to avoid. But it's hard, or it can be hard to avoid to get too emotional connected. So, like, how can you
It is not
get?
bad to be emotionally connected. The see, what I was saying is it should hamper the data collection. See, in some cases, that emotional connect may reveal more than what you had anticipated. Where do we draw that line? If we are, if that situation or something that requires, and I can go on and giving examples where we were in such a state that it started, it was very difficult to articulate what the person was saying, right? That shouldn't happen. And that's why, first thing, it is not wrong to be emotionally connected. How much do we get into it becomes a question. Sometimes as a researcher, I would say, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed, can we take a break? That's absolutely fine. Because if they start getting charged, and you're not able to focus, you can say, I'm so touched with your story, I think I need a break or water break, just to get calm my nerves down. That's absolutely fine. And take that liberty. It is not something which is a bound activity where it has to be done in one go. So if you emotionally connect, which is good, if they feel more connected, they're going to talk to you, perfect. But if it's going to hamper the data collection, in that case, even for the participants, sometimes you may say you want to take a break and talk sometime later. That's also absolutely fine. So first question is not wrong to get emotionally connected. It shouldn't hamper your process. And if you find that trigger, and after this question, most of the people get emotionally aroused, and they abandon the interview, then you have to figure out a way to go through it, right? So that is the key element of how do you tweak your interviews, how do you talk to them, how do you bring something before, after, and that's the art you hone. And every person will get their own style over a period of time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Anything else?
Maybe you can share your LinkedIn again, or it's also in the WhatsApp group in case you want to stay in touch with Amit afterwards,
Sure.
or if you have any additional questions or
No,
discussion.
would be more than happy. It's just, I would love to talk about it. As you would have seen already, there is so much to talk about. I've been preparing it for 2 weeks. I've been reading so many books. It's really interesting. If anyone is, want to get deeper into it, there's a book called 101 Mental Models. A beautiful book about how people perceive world around us. Yes, would be more than happy if there's anything that I can help you with. And thank you for these great questions. I think these were very, very interesting to develop upon. Great.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Who's that?
Lots
For
of
the
food for
preparation.
thought.
It was
Yeah.
really, it was fascinating, inspirational. So thank you.
Great. My pleasure.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you a lot. I would watch you. Maybe you will have another kind of session. So it's my
Sure.
pleasure to listen to you, really. I'm
Yeah.
also a coach, and you're insightful as kind of summing up my knowledge, but adding a lot of that. So it's
Yeah.
really perfect. Thank you, Amit.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. Great. Okay.
Ben, thanks everyone for joining. I think Vachagan wants to say a few final words. An official goodbye. Thanks for hosting us.
And thank you everyone for joining. The recording will be shared in YouTube and Babele. You can find it. And I have already shared the slides in the chat. Feel free to find it. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions.
Have a nice
And see you
weekend.
soon.
Thank you. Same here.
Thank
Hope to stay in
Bye-bye.
touch.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
All the best.
See ya. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.